Okay, everyone, welcome to the November 3rd Thursday for 2021. Tonight we've got mapping with Paul Doherty and Ed Cook. And first, before we get started there, I want to actually welcome and say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those who are joining. Just about a year ago, we started this program, and it was always just good evening because we had a very small audience. Tonight, we have people attending from around the world. Specifically, I think Ed Cook is in New Zealand, I believe, joining us from Wellington. So we have quite a following now, and excited to get moving with this program. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about next month's Third Thursday program. We'll be talking about avalanches, the new developments in avalanche safety and rescue technology. That's going to be presented by Michael Finger. He's the assistant commander for Salt Lake City County Sheriff's Search and Rescue, and he's also the ICAR delegate for the MRA in avalanche rescue. Again, I want to say thank you to Michael St. John and his team, Kate Larson, Gary Ferris, who's our webmaster, Don Wilson, and Ava Sophia Szymanski, and Charlie Szymanski, who is the chair of the Education Committee. This program started again a year ago and has grown exponentially over the last few years. So thank you to all of your hard work to getting this program moving forward. And I'll introduce our speakers tonight. I'll introduce Paul. Paul is the co-founder of the MRA's Mission Data platform. He's the volunteer project manager for the MRA mapping team, and he's a geographic information specialist professional. And with that, Paul, I will turn it over to you. I will stop share. And
all right,
turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the introduction. How's my audio?
Good audio. And one thing I forgot to mention before you get started, if you all have a question during the presentation, there's chat. You can find chat at the bottom of the screen, and just put a question in the chat. If you preface it with the word question, that'll help us find it in the list of chat. Thanks. Back to you, Paul.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thanks everybody for your time tonight. More importantly, thank you for all the countless hours you've put into the Mountain Rescue Association. And what I find as I meet more and more of you, it's not the only volunteer role you play in the community. So just thank you for that. I've been involved with the Mountain Rescue Association mostly through this project since 2013. I've moved around quite a bunch. As soon as I settle in somewhere, I look forward to joining a team. But I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and then we'll just jump into what we mean when we say the MRA Mission Data Platform, and really more than just making maps. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll introduce Ed in a little bit here. So just give me the thumbs up when you see a screen that says MRA more than mapping. Good. All right. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video because I make funny faces when I'm presenting and looking at the other screen. So I'll come back in a little bit. All right. So before we get started, I just wanted to give a little context to talk about how maps have had an impact on my life, and ultimately how search and rescue has come together with maps to really change the course of my career and help build some communities. I grew up in New York City. I felt as a kid very lucky to grow up there. I learned a lot. However, as I became a teenager and did things like Boy Scouts and started hitting the trails, I realized that the chlorophyll to asphalt ratio was a little too low. And so I took up a first degree in environmental biology in a very snowy town called Syracuse. and I had access to the really amazing Adirondack Mountains, and also the Catskills and the Finger Lakes and this really cool area called the Tug Hill Plateau. And I was getting outdoors quite a bit, really focused on environmental biology. I was studying things like endangered species and hydrology and water systems. But it's where I took my first GIS class, and we'll talk about GIS in a bit. But all I wanted to do, and the reason why I took this class, was I had a bunch of data on my Garmin eTrex for all this endangered species mapping I was doing. And I just wanted to get it on a decent map because I felt like the agencies I was working with just weren't doing an adequate job. So this is the little bird I was helping to protect in the off the Barrier Islands of Long Island in New York. And what I was finding is the more I got into the mapping components, the more I was actually learning about the species and how humans interact and how to better protect them and balance the use of the beach with the fact that these birds are trying to reproduce there. And it's a long story, but between my master's and ending up in Yosemite National Park, I met the chief ranger in Yosemite National Park who was facing a serious challenge. Up until this time, they thought that the illicit and illegal growing of marijuana was only being done in the national forest until they found it first in Redwood National Park and then Yosemite and then Sequoia. And we were able to get some funding where I could use my GIS skills actually as an analyst to help map out clues to figure out where these grows were occurring, and not so much to stop the use and growth of marijuana, but more to keep it out of the park where it really doesn't belong and to keep the visitors safe. So that was my first kind of mapping and public safety job. The rangers figured out pretty quickly that this was a useful capability. And so they got me involved in some poaching cases. And the moral of this story was if you're doing something legal, clear out your GPS and your tracks, because we will find every place you poached in the past 10 years. But what really got me interested in GIS and public safety was the only place for me to work in Yosemite Valley, because this was an experimental position, was in the back of the SAR cache. And sounds awesome now and probably sounds pretty cool for a lot of you. But at the time, it was just like a dusty space in the back of this building where I really didn't know what they were doing. I come from a firefighter, New York City firefighter background, and I really didn't know what it meant to do search and rescue in a national park or in the Sierra Nevada. So I learned really quickly, kind of trial by fire, when they asked me just after I took my wildland fire GIS course to make maps for search and rescue for a missing person search. And I got so interested in that problem for lots of reasons, and decided to convince a PhD committee to let me do my PhD on the use of GIS for search and rescue. And so think of this as like 2009, SAR topo is just starting to come out. We're starting to move off of just purely paper maps, and we're starting to collect a lot more data. And I just found it to be a fascinating topic and was able to apply a lot of my background in biology to this what I call an inherently spatial problem. Because I learned a lot about incident command structure and managing incidents, and I actually had a law enforcement commission, I felt like I had a lot of experience using GIS, but also understanding public safety. And so the company ESRI, or ESRI, as a lot of people know it, hired me to lead their disaster response program, which was pretty awesome because it was more or less a philanthropic role to help agencies respond to disasters with all of this new and emerging technology. And I had really the time of my life and an opportunity to work across the world. I've done quite a bit of teaching because I feel like it's not enough just to work with public safety agencies. We need to prepare the future. And so I've done some teaching across University of Redlands and Johns Hopkins. And I had the awesome experience to live in New Zealand for 2 years, where I was able to go around the country and set up emergency management and GIS workshops. This is where I got exposed more to urban search and rescue. I was working closely with the New Zealand USAR team. Simultaneously, there were lots of disasters in the United States, and I was beginning to get called back and decided to end our 2-year time in New Zealand. But fortunately, I met some amazing people, including Ed Cook, who's on the call, who in his day job works for Eagle Technology, which is a technology provider in New Zealand, but also a member of the Landsar system there in New Zealand. And we're going to hear a little more from Ed, if not tonight, probably on a future presentation. And basically this whole time I stayed involved with this nonprofit organization called the National Alliance for Public Safety GIS Foundation. You can go to their website, napsigfoundation.org, and they have a lot of great resources for both emergency management agencies, but also first responders who are looking to use geospatial tools. And I consider this still like a family. Lots of volunteer work and grants and opportunities to help the government do things that they have trouble doing on their own. And then finally, my true dream has come true, that I am able to work for the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, as a full-time GIS specialist dedicated to the urban search and rescue team. And so I do stay involved in mountain rescue and missing person search operations when I have time, but I've been pretty busy this past year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. This is a photo of firefighters using GIS without knowing it. They're looking at a map of density of, unfortunately in this case, victims in the Surfside collapse in close to Miami just earlier this year. So for me, GIS is personal, right? Like it's really opened up a lot of doors for me. And somewhere along the way, I got really interested in the Mountain Rescue Association. So I had known John Petter from Sierra Madre, one of the MRA teams, pretty well. We were working on a bunch of projects together, and he introduced me to Monty Bell, who I believe is on San Diego and very involved with Cal OES. And Monty was describing that the Mountain Rescue Association is growing. There's more and more missions, and they're trying to better understand how to collect the data. And I said, well, how are you doing it? How are you finding out about how teams are doing mission data? And he said, well, some people send us shoe boxes. Some people send us envelopes. We get a bunch of paper reports. We put them in an Excel spreadsheet. And then we just kind of, we get all their summaries, and we basically have a tally, and we crunch some other numbers. And I had just done this same process in Yosemite of saying, why don't we actually map the locations of the incidents so that we can learn from it in the future? And so likely there was some beer and bar napkins and long conversations. And I had been working at Esri at the time, and John and I were able to prototype some new ways of doing GIS that's more form-based, that allowed the MRA to be the first actually to test this whole approach of form-based data collection to get data on a map. So that's a long story, but that's how I bumped into the MRA, and I'm really thankful for it. That little project and prototype and promises made over a few cold beers really became a partnership, because I quickly realized I couldn't do this alone. I teamed up and brought in the EURISA's GIS Corps, which is a nonprofit organization that helps to coordinate volunteer-based GIS services to communities around the world. And they really do focus on helping other nonprofits. So I thought this was just the perfect match. And so since 2013, since the conversation to 2020, the MRA collectively is collected over 16,000 missions and put them on a map. And 2,000 of those are missing person search operations, which makes this a really unique database. Obviously, the ISRID, the International Search and Rescue Incident Database, has lots of missing person search operations. But actually what's astounding is there really aren't that many databases in the world that have your normal day-to-day missions and trainings logged in one place. So really, really cool. And I really applaud the MRA for trying that out. And so here's just a little sneak preview of all of your data on a map over the past almost a decade. And we can really begin to see where the MRA does business. There's definitely some data quality stuff to work on with all of you, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on tonight, so we can rescue some of these missions that probably didn't happen in Kansas, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So What is GIS? You know, like I've done a lot of teaching and I really don't like in many ways how GIS is taught. I feel like it sounds very stuffy. And I bet there's someone in the audience who took a GIS course in like 1998 and they hated it because it was boring and technical and not what they wanted to do. And I can relate. So for me, you know, GIS is about information that you can see on a map and make decisions from. And I know that comes up short because we can do a lot with GIS. We can do spatial analyses. We can look at space-time patterns. We can make amazing infographics and story maps. But I think that this definition works for most of the firefighters and emergency managers that I work with. So just information you can see on a map and make decisions from. If you want to learn more, there's actually a really cool ebook, and you can get it printed, I believe, but the ebook is free, and you'll have that when we share out these slides tonight. So just from this year, you know, I've used GIS on a number of different missions. Here's just a preview from the unfortunate collapse in Miami in Surfside. And we were using GIS, as I mentioned, to hone in on where were victims last known to be, in this case, in a 3D space, and where are they most likely to be found, and where have we found them, and who's left to find. And so kind of similar to a missing person search operation, but you know, this is over 100 people unaccounted for in a very different environment. And so this was a unique use of geospatial tools. And then another big mission this year was Hurricane Ida, which is almost the opposite. Now we have like, you know, thousands of square miles to cover in a wide area search. And we use the same tools to achieve that by putting the GIS in the first responders' hands and making it really, really easy. So, but what does it all mean for the GIS course? So I thought I'd take a second or a few minutes here to talk about what have the MRA and the GIS Corps been doing behind the scenes. So, and we couldn't have everybody present tonight, but I wanted to introduce some of these volunteers you might have interacted with through email or behind the scenes doing good work. So number one is, you noticed up top, it was 3 guys. We were good at talking, but like Caroline was the one that really helped bring this to the next level. So we were able to get some good prototypes together. But Caroline's the one that helped us move to Survey 123 with all the making the data collection easy is actually quite complex because when we do anybody here who's entered the data, we try to make it so that you don't get a question if it's not relevant to the type of mission you're working on. And so Caroline's taken all of the capabilities of Survey 123 and tried to get a lot of information collected in as simple a way possible, and definitely is a lot faster than just filling out a spreadsheet. So this has been really great. Caroline's been kind of the project lead for that. She also helps do a bunch of R&D, and she uses a lot of what she learns in this project on her own work as a GIS specialist in, I believe, the state of Wisconsin in Madison. And so I didn't want to spend too much time on this because I think a lot of the people here have probably used it, but basically we set up a series of websites and tried to make it really easy for you to just use what's called the Mission Data Portal, where you can go to a Survey 123 form, enter your team name, some basic incident information. And then the most important part for us in many ways is getting it on the map. And so you can type in coordinates, you can type in addresses, but the real important thing here is, let's pick on Monty's neck of the woods. It's really important that you verify where you're putting your mission. And that's something that we've noticed. Sometimes people are heads down, they type in coordinates maybe backwards or transposed, and the point goes out in the ocean or in Asia and they don't notice. So we're trying to work on that and do more training, but it's really as simple as, you know, just look at your map and make sure the pin's in the right location. And that's pretty much it. So Monty says, you know, for most people, it's like 3 minutes a mission. You click submit. There is actually a mobile app. You can enter this from your phone on the way back if you want to do it while it's fresh. And I know a lot of the newer MRA members are digital natives and were pretty much born with an iPhone in their hand, and they probably, you know, prefer to do it that way. So Caroline and I have worked to try to get this as simple as possible. There's a couple of apps you can use to edit your data, get reports from your data. And then something that we're working diligently on now is getting all of the data from since 2014 archived in one place. And I'll talk a little bit about that next. But really, really important, there's training videos for you. There's a full YouTube playlist. I think most people get the hang of Survey 123 after just 1 or 2 entries, but there are videos here for you that will update as the platform changes. So that's kind of the big collection project, which is how this all got started. As I've been responding to disasters around the world and just running out of time in the day, we decided to pull in a GIS core volunteer named Jessica Beres to help with almost like customer support. So when you email mramapping@gmail.com, Jessica will triage it, figure out who needs to answer it. And then in many cases, she'll answer it herself. And she kind of keeps an eye on things like, points ending up in the ocean. She might reach out to you and say, hey, are you having an issue with your survey? And so Jessica is super talented. She's actually a very active GIS core volunteer and actually works on a lot of disaster response. And so I really appreciate Jessica taking time out of her day to be a part of this project. I don't have a good picture of Jim, but I know that he's super smart. So I tried to pick something that looked smart here. But Jim is working on the archive project, and Jim really wants to work on the analysis, but we can't do a lot of data analysis until all the data is brought together. And not to bore you with databases, but each year in the beginning, the MRA wanted to kind of change the form slightly, and we're learning as we go what's going to work for everybody. And so all that data has to be kind of mushed together into one database in a nice, clean way. And so Jim is working through that right now. He's got sort of the first prototype of that archive. And that was the map I was just showing you before. And so that you could go back and look at all of your data through the years. And we're working with the MRA board to talk about, what would be ways to make the data accessible to the community. We'd obviously anonymize things and remove sensitive content, but is this something that the MRA wants to do to actually open up the data for more collaboration and research? So there's an open data page you can check out that we're testing right now. So poor Jim gets the boring job, but soon we'll start getting into some analyses. Erin Arkinson, who's actually on a search and rescue team herself, and also I believe Jim is too. Erin is working on outreach, and she wants to do, she's been helping on outreach in 2 directions. One, to the MRA itself, creating sort of like admin, what we call dashboards, so that you could filter data by region and see how your region is doing, but also engaging the public. And so this dashboard, which is a map that has statistics around it, this is something that you can actually access from the MRA.org website. There's a big button there. And so you can actually use this for outreach today. It's just got a few tools. You can filter by year, your region, and even your team. And so Erin's built this, and I believe if you open it up on a mobile device, it even shrinks down and just kind of gives you the stats, since it's hard to fit a whole dashboard on just a phone. Erin is going to transition into playing more of a leadership role with the GIS core. So she may be handing off this project soon to another GIS core that'll learn more about the MRA. And so we're pretty excited for her to pass the torch. So those are just some of the projects. And I don't know how many people here, I should have set up a poll, even knew this was going on. The goal for us is actually to make it really easy for you and to not know that there's complicated stuff going on in the background. But maybe sometimes it helps to have a little more context for all this great work and to know that there's these volunteers out there supporting your mission. So that's kind of a up-to-date kind of what we've done so far. What's next? We really want to start getting into the fun stuff for GIS people, which is analysis. And I think for a lot of you, you're probably interested in this too. Everything from, lost person behavior and comparing it to the ISRID, out to are we using effective tactics in the field? even things like, based on the mission types, are we getting the right types of training? And so I just wanted to show you some snapshots of, this is a tool called Insights that I was playing with earlier today, and it just allows me to make some really quick charts. So we want to answer maybe the who questions. Who does the MRA rescue? And so I did age instead of gender, because I bet you can all guess the gender that has more customers. But if we look at the age, you can kind of see a real spike here in the early 20s. And when you use this tool, you can actually interact with the map and kind of see where are these people being rescued by their age group. And so that's just an interesting snapshot there. We can look at things like subject categories. So most people that are involved in search and rescue know that a large percentage of the activity is hiking. But it's great to see actually the diversity of the different types of missions that the MRA responds to. And, interesting things like, wow, would you think dementia and Alzheimer's patients makes that large of a percentage? And maybe over time we could look at, is it increasing? Talking about like the what they were doing. We can look at things like the where. So not just the where on the map, but what types of places, or as we would call in biology, habitat, are we rescuing people in? And so obviously it's a large component of wilderness, but we do see urban and suburban and water in there, and it'd be great to look at this over time. Are we getting more urban missions as law enforcement need more help looking for, missing persons in that environment? And then the when, right? So we can look at time of year. Again, probably not a surprise for a lot of you, but it is interesting to look at this geographically. Obviously, you'd expect still a pretty heavy caseload here in Southern California, where I live, in January and February. But if we look at all the MRA data total, you can probably see why it's hard to get meetings together in July and August, right? So if you're planning to pull people together, you might want to do it in November and December. And then what I'm more interested in, especially down at team level, is like time of day and day per week. When I was living in Boulder, Colorado, looking at Rocky Mountain Rescue Group's data, it was really interesting to see, yes, of course, there's a lot of missions on the weekend, but there was actually some interesting spikes, midweek, that maybe they knew, but maybe it's great to be able to tell your story on the map and talk to your members about why you need coverage, not just on the weekends, and so on. So we can look at things like experience and fitness, and we can look at hours per incident. Looking at there were definitely missions that had more than 600 hours, but the average and median mission length, 25 to 47 hours. So explaining to the public, like, just an average mission is going to cost, could potentially cost a week of volunteer time amongst the volunteers that respond. So just looking at data, not just maps, but a little bit differently. And so these are tools we have and that you have to do this. The tool I used tonight was called Insights. We are just kind of prototyping it. You can actually make a lot of these graphs in Excel, but it's nice to be able to do it on like the dynamic data. And so Insights has been a good tool for doing that. And I thought, what I'm most excited about, going back to, my research and what the community is interested in, by going through this process of mapping data when we were in Yosemite, we were actually able to tease out a lot more insights than we expected, right? So going back to, a missing person search operation, obviously we're really interested in where the point last seen is and all these other factors. This is a graphic from Ken Phillips, and I don't know if they still have the National Park Service training, but I've always liked this this graphic because this is a graphic that can be made on a whiteboard. But when you start to actually put this on the terrain, it tells a whole nother story. And so the research we went through talked about a lot of value in just putting the instance on a map. And so this is 10 years of Yosemite data that were locked up in paper reports, just like the MRA. And we actually had to come up with a strategy to get the data mapped from paper and do it in as accurate as a way possible. And if it wasn't accurate, at least be able to explain how uncertain we were. And so that's like one of the first things we did, was spend a whole lot of time taking case incident reports and putting them on the map. And so just what I'm showing there is the little X's are where missions occurred. And then if they were a search mission, you'll see like the as the crow flies path to where they were found. And so we got really interested not just in all the mission data, but specifically the missing person search data. And so we looked at what Kester and others have done with the statistical rings and Euclidean distance. And we hypothesized, we said, would we have the same results as Kester's data? And I'll give you a second to think about, would Yosemite, would using the lost person behavior book be helpful in Yosemite? So I thought about that for a long time. And in order to do this, we needed to take a couple of extra steps. We wanted to look at things like, how does the terrain in Yosemite affect outcomes? And so we made a map of what we call impedance. Just think of it as like if we chopped Yosemite up into a bunch of grids, how long and how hard would it be to cross any of those individual grids? You can actually map time on a map. And so we would look at cases where the person goes missing. And we would say, based on trails, streams, vegetation, slope, a lot of factors, how far could they go in a half hour? How far could they go in 3 hours, which is this lime green line? This is what we call isochrones, and you're actually mapping time. This is not predictive. This is just saying, given the time, the moving time, how far could this person have gone? And so this is a really fascinating part of GIS research, and something that we actually revealed some insights. So number one was, let's just take the Kester approach and look at our data. And what we found was that 25% ring, that innermost ring, was almost a perfect match. There's probably lots of reasons for that, right? Like a lot of missing people end up being found at the PLS or very close by. So we weren't too surprised by that. But as we started moving outward, our data was showing that people were found closer to the PLS or the initial planning point than they were by using just the Kester book alone for hikers. And Rob and I, we've talked a lot about this. He's not extremely surprised. Yosemite has a very unique landscape, and we would expect that people don't generally go as far. There also might be some methodology differences because, we really scrutinized the data and mapped it as accurately as we could. A lot of ISRID is relying on, summary data. So, but this was interesting, right? So what we concluded was, the rangers can keep using ISRID as a general guide, not telling you what to do, but general advice. But be wary that your search areas, if you purely use ISRID, might be a little bit bigger. And just be mindful that you may want to focus in and make sure that you have enough resources to cover those areas. So that was pretty cool to kind of shake that out. We also looked at estimates of time movement based on how far away they were found. So if this person was found here, they would have been in this like 2 to 5 hour time window. Is that what we expected? Is that what the rangers expected? Is that what the lost person behavior statistics expected? And we kind of stacked that up against all the cases, and we really began to learn more about how people move through the landscape. Probably the unexpected finding of that was, of all the fancy stuff we were doing, the thing that would be most helpful for rangers to put on a map right away are these purple lines, or we would call these polygons because they're areas. And if you can type in the chat, what do you think these are? You can cheat and read, but think about what came to mind when you saw the map. Watersheds, cool. So you either cheated or you work with this data set, totally fine. But what we found was a lot of rangers in the old days were very good at reading topographic maps and seeing things like ridgelines. But this open data set that's available across the entire country is called the watershed data set. And we found in Yosemite, in general, if someone went missing, unless they had a very good reason to otherwise, they were generally found in the same watershed or a neighboring watershed. And so you could look at where they were, your IPP, your initial planning point, and say, let's at least look at the watersheds closest to begin looking at big, chunky planning areas. And this proved to be really useful. I used this a few times as I was working in plans on different searches, and it's even helped as recently in searches that we've assisted with in Hawaii. And I know there's been lots of great research since I finished this up, especially I believe Matt Jacobs and others have focused in on using linear terrain features to narrow in your search. And I think when you combine the two, you have actually a really powerful tool. So what does it all mean for you? Well, first of all, just start with the basics. Like if your team is getting your mission data in, you're actually contributing to some of these things. We're going to learn about the data as we collect more and more of it. But I want to show you more about what you get out of it. That's really important to me. When I work with firefighters, I don't just have them collect data, I show them how it helps them. And that's what something I want to do a better job of with the MRA in the future. So some really relatively simple things. If you've ever built a website or you've put together a blog post or someone on your team has, I guarantee you can make a really nice, simple public information map if you wanted to put that on your website and your team agreed to do so. So I'll just show you a little bit what that process would look like. And we can actually talk about that in a bit if that's something that you're interested in training on. So here is a map of, this is just the current year. And obviously people are still entering data and cleaning it up. But the little blue pins are, I believe these are the MRA home bases. And then the orange dots are mission data. And this is just one way to symbolize them. This is what we call a web map. And a web map is where you can kind of bring the data to life and not just make paper maps from it, but actually make interactive apps and things like that. So the first thing a lot of people want to do when they're looking at a map like this is I intentionally made the base map here, like the canvas, very bland. You might be interested in imagery for your area because maybe imagery helps you tell your story. So you can simply change the base map, probably a lot like you would do in Sartopo, to imagery. Or you might decide we are really interested in the data itself, and we'd like to really just highlight that. So you can look at other base maps like a light gray canvas and kind of let the data pop. And you get to decide, and it's very easy to change and fight over. A lot of teams will probably fight over that. The next thing you might want to do is say, I love the MRA, but we're kind of focused on our team. So I may want to filter. And when we say filter, we're not making coffee. We're saying, let's not show everything. We're not deleting any data. We just want to only show data for our team. And so if I've lost you already, it's okay. You're probably not the one that's going to make the map for your team, but there's probably someone on your team that would totally understand this and be interested in doing it. So maybe think about who that person is if it's not you. So when we make filters, we're basically saying, well, what do we want to filter by? In this case, I'm going to filter by team. And I will pick on, don't tell the San Bernardino team, but let's pick on anybody here volunteer. You've got search data or mission data in. Looks like there's lots in Colorado. Anyone in the chat? All right, let's pick on Seattle. Let's see if they've got anything yet. Dope. Okay, I don't know if anybody's entered data for Seattle for this year yet. We actually have a lot in the archive. I'm going to go ahead and pick on, we'll start with Rocky. So what that did is it didn't delete any data. Don't worry, no data's disappeared. It's just filtered it a lot like you would do in Excel. And we can see just their missions for this year. And that's how we do that. And remember, this is data you can see on a map. So when you click on it, it's like you kind of brought that spreadsheet to life, and it'll give you the real basics here. We've kept this really simple, kind of like for a public audience, and you can customize this at a later time. You might be thinking, I don't really like the little orange dots. They're not visible enough. So you can go in here and change the way it shows up. And that's called a style or symbology. And you can, there are a lot of different ways to do this. I personally, if I'm making a thematic map, I really like these firefly symbols. And you can pick your favorite color. but red and orange tend to show up really well. And then we can bump up the size to make it really, really stand out. And then if you've ever worked with a GIS before, you're probably saying, well, what if I want to symbolize it by the mission type or, what the activity? All of that is available to you. This is just like a mini GIS in your browser, and you don't have to really learn GIS from scratch to do this. When you're done fiddling with your map, you simply save it. And you can share it a whole bunch of different ways. You can decide just to share it with your team or share it publicly. I'm going to keep it private just to me for now. But I can very easily choose from a number of different apps. Probably the easiest is either a story map or what we call an incident app. And, if you're new at this, you may just want to pick the basic. And the basic is going to take you to a little landing page that'll look a little bit like a blog post. I'm just going to give you a preview. And what you're going to see is just a very, very simple map that you can actually embed in your website or link to. Just a very simple map sometimes is the best map for the job. And I think it's good to start simple. And there's actually a lot of free training, which I'm going to point you to in just a moment. And so that's pretty much it. I just wanted to give you an idea. This wasn't like the training, but to give you an idea of like what's available to you as an MRA member. There's 2 lessons here that'll walk you through creating kind of your first map. Interestingly, I think it's Clark County, Nevada, which there might be someone on the call here that's from nearby there. And then this one is an example of making a story map, I think about a volcano in Guatemala, but you'll learn how to use this technology and apply it to your team. And you don't have to wait for me. You can just go ahead and try it out. If you're really interested in spatial analysis, you've kind of made maps before and you want to do more, there's actually a whole free training. It's called a MOOC. So if you're looking to take it to the next level and take a more serious training, there's a really cool opportunity here, and that's free. And then NAPSG Foundation also has lots of tools. So a lot of the tools that we use for urban search and rescue or for missing person search, NAPSG Foundation has created some tools here where you can go and learn a little bit more about how to work with a GIS specialist to deploy them. Or you can actually, in many cases, we have a sandbox. You can actually just try them out in a training environment. And we do this with the 28 FEMA USAR teams and all of the most of the state urban search and rescue teams across the country. And they're training in this sandbox environment all the time. And this is a little bit more like way more than just mapping, right? It's a what we call common operating picture that we use for response. And you can learn about that. But I suggest just starting with a really simple, map for your team. So I want to know from you what you're interested in. I'm going to attempt to get this to you a few different ways. I'm going to put a link in the chat. If you have a phone with a camera, you can scan this QR code, or you can go to menti.com and enter in 1937-8866. And I'm going to pull up the presentation. You can use either your phone or just a web browser in front of you to vote. And I want to see what your training interests are. So you can choose from some of the topics I showed you just a little earlier. Actually biasing the results by showing you the results, but looks like mission data, just getting the basics of how to get your team up and running is winning. And that is something that's great because it's something we can train and might be timely with the end of the year here. All right, so we got 18 votes, 20 votes. No one wants to vote for the underdogs. Everybody's being polite. Nobody's refusing training. So, okay, great. Well, this is good. This gives us an idea whether we do it in this environment or host a dedicated training time. Sounds like definitely mission data, and then maybe simple kind of public maps are something everybody's interested in next. Cool. Well, that brings me pretty much to the end of my presentation. My real conclusion is just number one, as MRA members, you have access to this. I think you deserve access to the best tools available. And I know that being a volunteer is tough, but I'm glad that the MRA has taken care of you and provided you these tools. I really do believe search and rescue is one of the most selfless things you can do. I love that it's a team sport and that it protects others, but it's also an inherently spatial problem. So I really think everybody doing search and rescue should have access to tools like this. I know a lot of people are using tools for missing person search, but I want you to be able to tell your story and show off the great work that you're all doing in your community. So thank you for that. We've got lots of materials buried in this website. This website's actually a story map. I think I built it about 4 hours ago. I use this type of briefing format all the time. I use it a lot for post-incident briefing. So that's it for me. I wanted to talk a little bit, just to introduce Ed. Ed and I work together quite a bit in New Zealand. In New Zealand, they've really kind of hit that next gear with using maps for search and rescue. So I'm hoping one day he can come on and talk about that. And Ed and I have been, over the past few months, being asked to help out on searches that have kind of taken, they've moved into extended search periods. And I know a lot of people here, including Mike St. John, have talked a lot about remote search support. So we are trying to find ways to bring together people who are, using their GIS skills across the world to help with search operations and kind of take it to that next level of spatial analysis and looking at things like, are there gaps in our search area that we need to take a more, objective approach to? So that's something that Ed and I are super interested in, and maybe Ed can talk a little bit about search and rescue in New Zealand in the future. And Ed, if you're there, you can jump on and say hello and introduce yourself.
Thanks for that, Paul. Great presentation. Good evening all and good morning all. I'm calling from Wellington, down in the North Island of New Zealand, down the other side of the world. And yeah, it's amazing to see the scale of the numbers of missions that you as an organisation undertake. I'm part of land search and rescue and also work alongside law enforcement here in New Zealand. And it's just amazing to see the same passion and commitment that we try and do down here in New Zealand, exemplified up there in the north. So I'm looking forward to coming back on virtually, and hopefully I can be up your way of the world. Given this COVID thing, hopefully will blow over at some point. But yeah, it's truly a global movement. So thank you, Paul, and the rest of the MRA team for the opportunity to hop on.
Thanks a lot, Ed. And is that the sun behind you, or just light reflecting off the persistent cloud cover?
It's the latter.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully it'll be a good day in Wellington the next time we talk. Thanks a lot. Great. So I'm going to just let it go out for questions. I don't know if there's anything that came up in the Q&A or just the chat that we should address.
Yeah, Paul, there are a few questions in the chat. I asked a couple, but I'm going to not be selfish, and I'm going to jump down to Sage Largan from Central Washington. Question of, can you elaborate on the types of missions MRA is interested in having in the portal?
I think, really, I'm just the map person. Monty is the statistics chair, and the board are really what's driving a lot of the questions. I know there was a lot of interest in like BLS versus ALS care. That was something that they had added to the form. So I would let that, I would kind of turn that back on the MRA and not just make it about the board, make it about your team. Like what's the type of information that you can learn from? It's not supposed to be a black box that you just enter data into and never see again. So that's something that I kind of put back on you. But personally, I'm very interested in accurate initial planning points and point found for search operations, because I think that is going to really help us over time better understand not lost person behavior, but missing person outcomes. So
great. And then another question from ICAR Air Commission. I believe that's probably Charlie, but Paul, what would you like the MRA teams to do more of in terms of data entry into the system?
I think what'll really benefit long term is just double check the map and where your data is going. And Jessica's done a good job. If she sees like, oh, they did it 3 times in a row and ended up in Asia, it's probably something simple like you copied coordinates out of another system and they're transposed. So just double check that map. There are occasionally like a bug or a glitch and it's totally not your fault, but just take a look and use the email mramapping@gmail.com and let us know if you hit an issue or you had an oops and you hadn't changed, you don't know how to edit the data. We'll work with you on it. So but it's your system, we're just trying to help. So
okay. And Guy Mansfield, Everett Mountain Rescue. Paul, we are looking for a user-friendly tool, not a Byzantine ArcGIS coding, that will take GPS tracks as input and provide as output the track line length within each search segment to support calculation of POD. Any suggestions?
yeah, so with the Urban Search and Rescue program, we're actually looking at a similar problem of in Urban Search and Rescue wide area search, we draw search segments. They tend to be like census blocks, or we'll use US National Grid. And we're trying to look at the buildings that we've come close to. And are there any buildings we haven't gone to? So I'm actually working on a project to create a tool to make that very easy. But this has come up multiple times over the years with missing person search operations. I'm not sure if Ed's done anything like this, but we're looking to build tools to do things like this. And so you're not the only one. I think going back to like the Madsen consensus days, you'd have estimated POD by the team as 80%, but then you look at their map and I'm like, you kind of only covered 20%. So it'd be great to have an objective way to do that. And I believe Don Ferguson had put some of that into his tools that he made, but it's definitely Byzantine Python scripts and stuff like that. And we'd have to put a user interface on it. So Ed, do you have any thoughts on that, or just add it to the list of things you're working on?
Yeah, we've just rolled it out recently to a lot of our law enforcement users who aren't friends of computers, and they tend to run in the opposite direction when they come across them. And we've managed to create a tool that they can use that allows them to just drag and drop the tracks on, and then it automatically shows in another view where they can click on each of those search segments and then see the distance traveled within that. So there's definitely things that we could learn from you guys, and definitely things that hopefully we can show you what we've been up to down this other side of the world.
Cool. Add it to your presentation list. And I think you'll have our contact information, Guy. I'm not sure, but definitely feel free to connect with Ed and I on that. And sorry, I don't have something I can just give you right now.
I've got a couple other questions, but if anyone else has any other questions, drop those into the chat. But let's see. Oh yeah, how frequently is the data refreshed? So as soon as I enter the data into the survey 1, 2, 3, are there specific times that the data is refreshed, or is it live once it goes in?
No, one of the reasons we use this system is it's live. So think of it as like your form went into the database and it's in the cloud and it should show up on a map. If it doesn't, something's wrong. We did, Caroline, because of all the changes the MRA wanted in the last year to the form, she did launch a new form. And so we've spent a few months transitioning people from the old form to the new form. And don't worry if you use the wrong one, we're rescuing your data and moving it, but everything should be real time. If your internet's slow, you might have to refresh the browser, but it's a real-time system. That's why we use it in Urban Search and Rescue. So good question.
And is that the same for the map that's on the MRA site itself?
Yep.
It is. Awesome. Okay.
It's supposed to be. Yeah. There are some filters that the MRA requested, like we don't put despondent cases, I believe, through there. So there may be some cases where it doesn't, but you didn't lose any data. It's just maybe not going to the public site.
Okay. And then another question from Sage with Central. Would you be willing to share your story map?
Yeah, watch this. There you go. And we can probably get it out through the follow-up email or whatever you send
Yeah.
out for the announcements.
That sounds great. Oh yeah, one other question on the mission data portal or the mission portal. Do you have to be logged in as your team login to get to that information? Okay,
Yeah.
I thought so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like we can create these views of the data. So if there's something you want shared publicly, you create like a live copy. It's a very tough concept to understand, but it's almost like a live copy of your spreadsheet, but you're not giving them everything. You decide what you want to share. So only the MRA members can edit, and only the MRA members can like see all the details. In particular, the comments, because we don't know what your intent was when you put the comments in there, and probably don't want to share it all with the public.
Awesome.
I have a question, if I may. So I love to talk. I've long been interested in doing a very similar thing with just our team's data, but I see that we're already doing it with all the teams, so that's great to see. So you provided some training resources for those interactive maps. And I'm wondering if those will cover if those training resources, and if just playing around with the interactive maps, I'll be able to hide specific missions or learn how to do that, because obviously there are specific missions that we don't want folks to see. If I can download the data and do some analysis, some statistical analysis, are there ways to do that? And then can we embed those ArcGIS info or like those maps into another website?
So yes to all of those. Those would be good topics for me to cover in a follow-up training, but please feel free to, yes, go and look at the training, skim them or take them. They're really useful. And then if you have any gaps, just email mramapping@gmail.com and one of us will get to you. And one of the things I want to do with the GIS core over the next year is figure out, like, are there teams trying to do things where maybe we should have like a GIS core member, especially if they live near your team, just be able to do like little trainings with you. So you're not relying on, us to respond to an email. So if that's something the MRA is interested in, I'm hoping Monty can bring that up at least at the winter meeting, is kind of pairing teams up with a GIS core volunteer. But yes to all of it. You can download the data, you can filter it by whatever you want, and you can embed very easily. Most of the applications have like a little share button, and you just grab the HTML and then you give it to your webmaster, and they take care of it. And if you are the webmaster, you'll know exactly what to do with it. So
sweet. Yeah, I am, and I should know more. But appreciate it. Thank you.
great.
Awesome. Any other questions for Paul that we want to address here, or we good? I think Charlie's got a follow-up, and then go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, real quick, Doug, thank you. And Paul and Ed, thank you for this. And I especially want to give a shout out. You mentioned his name a couple of times. Monty Bell, the MRA membership committee chair, who really was the guy who got this all started many, many years ago. And Monty has made one of the greatest contributions to the MRA by leading this wonderful group of people. So that's the most important thing. And the only other thing I wanted to add is, Paul, for you, at the same time you were the Esri Disaster Response Program Manager, I was privileged to run the American Red Cross Disaster Response Program out of Washington, D.C. And in the middle of our response to Hurricane Sandy, I shouldn't say in the middle, at the start of our response to Hurricane Sandy, to give you all a sense of how Esri worked inside the Red Cross Disaster Operations Center. We had a brilliant guy called Greg Toon, and Paul, maybe you knew Greg. He would overlay Esri maps of socioeconomic data and the disaster areas that were mapped as having been destroyed by Hurricane Sandy, as an example. And within just a matter of hours, he could predict exactly how many shelters we'd need at the Red Cross and how big and how many beds they'd need, or cots, I should say, based solely on looking at socioeconomic data. So you can imagine if a disaster hits a high income community, the number of Red Cross shelters is going to be very low because those people have the means to go to hotels and take care of themselves. Conversely, if it hits a low income community, the number of shelters and the capacity of those shelters would be very big. And thanks to Esri, and we're talking 10 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, not just last year, Esri data would make it possible for us to predict with almost certainty how big of shelters, where they needed to be, based solely on the socioeconomic data overlaid on top of where the disaster impacted areas were. And Paul, maybe you played a big role in that, but certainly the work you did played a big role in that. I just wanted to show you how that was capable. That capability was there 10 years ago. So, and again, a shout out to Money Bell.
No, thanks for that. I had a lot more hair back then, and I didn't sleep a lot during Hurricane Sandy, but we got through it.
Both.
Very good. No, thanks for sharing that, and we should catch up sometime.
Yeah, we should. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for joining. If you, again, I put this in the chat, but excuse me, if you missed anything from this presentation or missed other Third Thursdays, we post the recordings up on the Mountain Rescue Association YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search Mountain Rescue Association, you can find all of the recordings from the Third Thursday programming on that site. So thank you again, Paul. Thanks also, Ed. I think I either saw a butterfly or a hummingbird zip past your window there briefly. And we appreciate all that you all are doing and helping the MRA map our missions so that we can reach out to our community and share the good work that this organization does.
Very good. Thanks. And thanks, Eva.